Hello and welcome to another episode of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. Today is part 2 of my conversation with Julie McLarnon from Analog Catalogue Studio in Ireland. If you haven't already, you probably won't now that you're listening to the podcast because you're probably all set about ready to listen to a podcast. If you haven't already, go and check out the video or the film. It's not a video, it is a video, but a film that Julie put together. If you go to the website Analog Catalogue or Julie McLarnon's website, if you Google it or look in the show notes of this, you'll find it. There's a really beautiful 25-minute film that sums up it shows it's filmed at Julie's studio, so lots of amazing sort of images of what goes on there, but also sums up Julie's approach to recording really beautifully. So I would advise going to check that out either before or after you listen to this episode. So we'll just dive straight in. Here we go, part 2 of my conversation with Julie McLarnon. If the people listening look you up, they're going to crucify me for not asking you about George Martin, because obviously the course that you did was George Martin's recording course. So I have to ask you about what working, being there with him or listening to him or having him as a mentor.
He was just the mentor. He was the mentor who put his name to that course and would come in annually, maybe biannually, but once a year, and hand out the certificates and the awards and stuff. And again, at 16, 17, 18, I wasn't the biggest Beatles fan. Like, I was a huge Velvet Underground fan, a huge kind of Bowie Roxy kind of New York scene, Talking Heads, all that kind of thing. But I wasn't somebody who'd, because my parents were Irish, I wasn't of the generation that had been raised on Beatles records. I've been raised on Irish records. So it didn't mean as much to me as it really should have done, and does now. Now I go to Abbey Road and I'm like, I got the best start that could have happened, but I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. And I walked out of there and then walked into Strawberry Studios working with Hannah. But I mean, it's not all luck. Like, I had grade 8 theory by the time I was like 15 or 16, and I could read score for the BBC, and I could hear if a mic was placed in the right place or not. So I was handy, like,
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. And I mean, I guess something that I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, because you did a lot of work at various studios post college. It seems there's 4 or 5 studios that you worked at before you started Analog Catalogue. But I'm kind of interested in the film that's just come out about the psychology of analog. I think it's an amazing sort of half an hour film that's out, but there's so much stuff that you say in that I want to unpack, and it's something, the kind of way that you talk about your approach to sort of the job is amazing. I find it really inspiring, just the way that you're talking about it now and in that film. And there's a lot to unpack in that film, to be honest with you. I mean, what's your I'll just start. I think if I just ask a question and we can start talking about that stuff. I mean, the one thing that particularly struck me was you talk a lot about your eyes and your eyes being closed and what happens when you open and close your eyes. And that really resonated with me particularly. That was the first note that I wrote down from the whole film was, about your eyes. And when I record sessions, my eyes are always closed, all the time closed. And I haven't really thought about it much, but it makes complete sense not staring at a screen. And there's a bit in the film where the artist that you're working with is listening to playback, and you're not looking at anything. You're all just sort of sat there. That's such an odd sight in this day and age. Usually everyone's sat around these 2 speakers looking at a computer. But you're all just kind of sat in the room together, and it's great. So could you talk a little bit about your sort of philosophy on Well, that specifically. It's
the science as well. It's not just the philosophy. The optic nerve.
Okay, your approach.
Just sucks the brain. It just absolutely sucks the brain. And understandably, you want to know if you're about to be hit in the face. So therefore, your eyes are constantly monitoring the situation to make sure you're not going to, walk into something or be hit in the face. But if you're sat in a comfy chair in front of two speakers and you don't think you're going to be hit in the face, you should just shut your eyes and just listen and not have them working. It's just turn them off. They're using all your brain battery. So just turn them off. And, I think the fact that I've been operating an Atari MTR90 remote since 1990 was the first time that I started operating that. I don't need to look at it. I couldn't operate it without looking at it. And again, with the Trident, I don't even really need to look at it. So most of my working day, I am not looking at anything. And in fact, I'm pretty blind. These are my glasses. And I don't wear them. When I'm working a lot of the time because they fall off whilst I'm crawling under pianos and stuff. So then I'll have them in my pocket, and now and then I'll pull them out just to set the parameter on an EQ or on a compressor or something accurately. But most of the time, I'm basically doing my job blind, and it works well. I can hear much better, and that I just rely totally on my ears. And yes, if you shut down your eyes, you hear a high res kick in, a higher quality audio kick in, that you just hear more detail.
What's the? I'm sort of jumping along a little bit, but you talk about your mixing approach and specific frequencies, which I thought was quite interesting, about the sort of just a lot of high frequencies existing. And could you talk a little bit about your approach to mixing, and that might encompass what I'm asking about specifically, but what in terms of your approach to where the sort of whole frequency spectrum, and how you're kind of picturing what you're aiming at, essentially.
Well, the question that I threw back to Salford, which is now a university, we've ascertained, and has actual professors in it and stuff in the acoustics department. And I recently, one of them reached out to me when the film came out, and I reached straight back going, tape bumped the lower mids, and you had to roll off a lot of stuff above 5k if you weren't using it. So if you were miking something that wasn't generating much up past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 up to 12k, if you weren't using it, lose it, because otherwise you're just listening to hiss, and that hiss is going to build up over the multi-track. So you were trained to cut the top to keep the tape hiss under control on anything that wasn't cymbals and things that needed those frequencies. And it's all about signal to noise ratio and controlling tape hiss. And then you throw it to tape, and tape's going to bump your lower mids for you anyway. And then you throw over to a different system that's capturing all these high-end frequencies, and you're not worried about tape hiss anymore, so you're leaving in all these air frequencies that people aren't used to hearing, and then you're throwing it through various types of compressors, and then eventually it's landing as an MP3 in somebody's earbuds. It's like, oh my god, what a recipe for nervous breakdown. It's just ouch. It's just not what we're used to. What we're used to is tape bumping the lower mids, engineers taking out all the top ends so you don't have tape hiss, then you're putting it on a vinyl record that can't do top end anyway, and then you sitting 6 foot back from the speakers and enjoying it. No anxiety at all happening in any of that. And the alternative of MP3s through earbuds, after it's gone through a whole different process that has just been amplifying the top end and the air frequencies constantly all the way along that process through capture, mix, mastering, manufacture and broadcast. Yeah, well, you started me. Not good for you.
No.
Not good for you.
I'm kind of interested in. I've just thought about this now. You know, if you're approaching a mix where, you know, you're recording everything to your 24 tracks, and you can't recall mixes, and you've got specific amount of, you know, finite amount of outboard gear that it's got to go through. You're not reaching for plugins every 2 seconds to do something with. You know, that's something that sort of YouTube tutorials would have you think is necessary all the time, and it's just not. In terms of mixing, are you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you essentially making sure that the source sound is right, and then are you thinking of yourself almost as a balance engineer, like, you know, like they used to call themselves, or, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, you know, you should know because this is your specialist subject, but that is the annoying thing that's happened to me staying operating the skill set that I operate, which would be the same sort of approach as happened in the 60s, 70s and 80s, right up until DAWs came into play. Is a producer would be the person who carved that sound at source, who made those creative decisions at source and captured, where the word producer has flipped, and now it's basically a pimped up mixing engineer that will change everything post. And the more radical the changes, the more you're seen as like an amazing producer. But I'm not operating in by those rules at all. I'm operating by the George Martin rules, and George Martin was a producer, and, you know, Tony Visconti was a producer, but I'm operating by those rules, which were, if you want that guitar sound, then I'm going to choose the mic for that, and then I'm going to choose the placement for that, and then I'll choose the board EQ for that, and then I'll capture it to tape, and that's that. And yeah, we were trained like you should basically be able to put your multi-track on, bring all your faders up to 0, press go, and it sound like the record. Give or take a few little, that's maybe a bit more cymbals than we need, and maybe push the vocal a bit, but it should sound like the record. And that was the way things were done up until all the options of digital recording arrived.
How did you find the way that you learnt, you know, sort of your all the learning in the studios that you worked in sort of post college, and then the advent of DAWs and sort of Pro Tools rigs and all that kind of stuff? What were you ever tempted to get involved in that side of things, or was it always tape? You know, did you get any sort of and was there any tension about your decision to sort of stick with what you were doing?
I thought about it, but everyone discouraged me, which was good. I didn't need much discouragement. And I, you know, I'm so poor at reading things that I wouldn't have been very good. Like I just knew it didn't fit. It wasn't something I could do. I'm a slow reader. We've already ascertained, didn't go to school, I'm a slow reader, and like it stops me listening. Like that just looking at screens and having to read where things are and operate anything screen-based tech just stops my ears working the way that they've trained themselves or whatever to work. So it wasn't something that I just prayed it was a fad. And obviously it's stuck around quite a lot, but that said, more and more people are realizing that, you know, the value of the analog mindset.
Well, hopefully, you know, I'm a case in point, and I hope that this whole podcast is about you know, is about that. And I'm really interested now about a balance, basically finding a balance, and that kind of a mixture of, this is how I'd love to do everything just purely analog, but I don't think that that's the people that I'm working with can't accommodate that, essentially. And I think that there needs to be a balance in mentality and approach to the way that people record. So, you're at one extreme where, they go to your place, it's residential, it's, everything about it, you're just embraced in sort of analog technology. But then perhaps, I like to think that somebody might come away from working with you and embrace some of those ideas at their, when they're sat at their computer, you can still record with that mentality without, you're not going to get the sort of analog results into like sonically, but you can definitely capture moments. And something you talk about in the film is accidents. And if you're not so quick with the delete button, you can capture those accidents and encourage
it is about speed as well. I mean, sometimes, and the psychology of playing people as well. Sometimes a musician will play something that they've never played it that way before. So their immediate reaction is that's not right. Can we get rid of it? Because that's not the way it's supposed to be. And then that's where your role as the producer, the engineer there, is to sit there and try and push them into a cup of tea, push them into thinking about something else, just buy enough time for them to come back down from performance mode and have their adrenaline settle a little bit so that they can then listen back and then just set it in the mix so that they can try and accept it. And 9 times out of 10, if I find myself protecting a take from a musician that wants to get rid, I am right. And they come round to going, actually, it sounds pretty nice. It's just new. It's just the fear of the new. But I've bought that time before they undo it. And I have to buy that time because unlike in Pro Tools, I can't just go over it and then 2 hours later go, should we just go back to that take? So, I have to protect what I have if I think it's worth protecting.
I think it's really cool. And I think it's probably quite I suppose back in sort of 60s and 70s, that's when that wouldn't have been an option necessarily to go over stuff unless you were, hiring out the studio forever and you wanted to just keep doing takes and takes and takes until it got perfect. But people were probably a bit more accepting that there was going to be errors, whereas now it's almost the culture is that there can't be any errors, and they don't realize that the beauty is in the errors themselves. And they're not necessarily wrong. They're just, it's almost that I like to think of it as something that's imperfect. Our brains like to, somebody explained it to me about fixing things. Your brains like to fix things that aren't perfect. So if you hear something that's not perfect, your brain enjoys it because it enjoys thinking, that it's filling in the gaps almost of the thing that isn't the perfect thing.
It keeps you on your toes as well, because we're pattern finders. So as soon as we hear something, we establish the pattern, and then when something hits outside of the pattern, that's when we come back in, we check back in and go, oh, I thought I had this sussed. I haven't. And so the more often that happens, the more you hang on to your listener, and the more, and in some ways, the more random that is, and the more complex it is, see Bohemian Rhapsody and records like that, then the more you hang on to them for longer, because they just can't wrap their head around every single tiny element of that, no matter how many times they listen. Whereas something's quite simple, quite perfect, nothing steps outside of the grid, they might like it first time, but it will be their baby shark by the time they've heard it 3 times. They will not like it.
Yes, you don't need to talk to me about Baby Shark. I've been there. I'd love to talk a little bit about gear and just about, so we've discussed the desk that you're using. What tape machine are you using, and what's your? It's
still the Atari MTR90.
Oh, fantastic.
I know that loads of people, especially on, I try not to say the gear sluts word because I definitely don't go on those kind of forums, but I know people are like, Studio 80s, we all need to do, and they do sound beautiful. But if you're using it to actually build and compete with the drop-ins of digital. The transportation on an Atari MTR90 is second to none. It's just the way that the heads are configured. You can drop in one note, which I do sometimes.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, when you think of I've not used one, so I can't really picture it, but it seems, you know, having used tape, you obviously know how tricky it is to find one note. That's crazy. If it's that
well, you've got to when you're doing a drop in, inevitably the rest of the band are like, oh, she missed it. But I haven't. It's because I know the distance between the playhead and the record head, so I have to get in that space. So she's like, oh, she's missed it. I've not missed it. Cool. But it's like in and out in a flash.
Yeah.
But it's learning that. It's learning the feel of the buttons and the distance between when you press record and when record actually happens, and when you press stop recording and when that actually happens.
Yeah.
But it's programmed into my, because I've been using the Atari MTR90 since 1990. It's just hardwired into me now.
It's an instrument. That's something that struck me when you talked about, you kind of discussed this in the film a little bit about knowing your sort of tools so well that you're not even thinking about it. And yeah, something that comes with plugins, that you're constantly being sold new ones all the time. So so everything's, you're thinking about the sort of physical movement of the plugin as opposed to just listening to what it does. And yeah, I suppose that's kind of nice that you've learnt your studio like it's an instrument, and well, it is an instrument, but you're playing it and you know it instinctively, like an instrumentalist knows their instrument. There's no thought process there. It's just straight from brain to fingers. It's exactly, you don't have to think about how do I do that again. You're just doing it automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, it's like that thing if you drive and somebody says what size the clutch on, you're like, I don't know. Yeah. Even though you've been driving for 100 years, like, it's because it's just there. It's in your motor. It's in your motor responses that, like, if you stopped me and said, I don't know, ask me a question about the patch bay, I'll be like, I don't know, but I do know. I just can do that. It's just my hands know.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Do you have some particular microphones that are go-tos that you like, or what are sort of the things that you find yourself constantly going back to?
Pencil mics that have a really warm sound, also known as KM84s.
I knew you were going to say that.
C28s. The AKG C28 or the Neumann KM84 are the secret. We can all throw a U87 in the air and capture everything, or a 414 and capture everything and more. But the secret of carving sound and only taking what you want and bypassing everything that, cutting out of the picture the stuff you don't want, is in those beautiful sounding directional mics, like a KM84 or a C28.
Yeah. The times, I don't own a pair, but I've recorded with a pair quite a few times, and there's a chap who's been on this podcast a lot of the listeners have used for mastering, actually, called Ben Pike. He's got a pair and he lives in Leeds near me, and they're just beautiful. They sound amazing on drums, and you're right, you're talking about creamy and crispy. They're creamy.
I use them on hi-hats.
Yeah, interesting.
Hi-hats. I know drums is your passion. Hi-hats, KM84, Valley People 610.
There we go.
That's what you need.
Maybe I need to get the credit card out. My dad listens to this. He'll be cursing. Yeah. So do you have general signal chains that you use all the time? Are you reaching for similar things? If you got a band in, are you recording the band at the same time? And have you got, do you use a particular signal chain for, say, kick drum or overheads or rooms, or is it changing depending?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. I don't know if somewhere on the website is like a playlist of some of my drum sounds.
I've listened to them. They're great.
So it's only to illustrate that there ain't one drum sound. Like,
yes.
It really depends on what you're after. So, and if you've listened to them, then you can't sort of say, well, what mic would you put on the, it depends. That said, often you will find me with a KM84 off axis around the hi-hats and the snare, taking a slice of hi-hat and a slice of snare drum, with that creamy little cutter that is the KM84, and pointing it at neither of the things that it is capturing, and that just delivers such a nice retro. It does all the work for you. You don't need to do much else. You stand there and you're like, I hardly need to EQ this. I hardly need to compress this. All my work is done. And that's the old art of, that kind of old school engineering, where you don't have unlimited compressors, you don't have unlimited outboards. So you do have to place your microphones in accordance to what you've got. And often I would place more mics on a kit than I would put to tracks. So there could be 3 mics on a snare, but it'd all go to one snare, to one track of the tape immediately, without discussion or telling the drummer what's happening. So they'll just go, oh, there's the snare sound, but I'll be over, I'll be under, I'll be to the side, and I'll combine them all and call it the snare sound.
Is that happening on 3? This might seem like a stupid question, but it's coming from
it's coming through 3 channels of the Trident.
Yeah, so they're all
and
separate.
Then all being sent to, so say coming in on channels 3, 4, 5 of the Trident, and then all being sent to tape track 7 or whatever.
Something I've read, I think I've mentioned this in every episode since I've read the book, but this Adrian Kerridge book, who worked at Lansdowne Studios, something he used to do was make or get the engineering department at the studio to make 2-way XLR cables that sort of went into one. So that's one way that he would double to double the channels. That's where that question was coming from, because I thought that's kind of, if you're putting it down into one, I mean, obviously you probably want to EQ them individually, but for somebody...
I do have splitters. I do have splitters. I've been known to use them. I do have splitter 2-into-1 cables, but generally I would be, like, for a snare situation, I'd be EQing the over, EQing the under separately, and then blending the two on a ratio to fit the type of drum sound we're going for, so it depends.
What I'm always interested in overhead miking techniques and rooms, because I flit about, to be honest, depending on what mood I'm in, and I'm curious, what do you have a go-to for, do you like mono overheads or stereo and positioning, and then room mics? What's your go-to?
What I don't do is go straight over the top like this, because it looks right, but it sounds wrong.
Yes, agreed.
And what you do get is shitloads of cymbals, and I don't like cymbals because they're packed full of anxiety frequencies. So I do tend to dampen, moon gel, whatever cymbals, and also make sure that they're in tune with the track. I have a thing that if you're constantly hitting a crash and it's constantly out of pitch with the track, it will drive me insane. So I will have to deal with that ahead of recording. And I will then, it depends on the piece. It depends, like if the drummer's just, doing loads of cymbal work, then I'll get as far away from those cymbals as I can. I certainly won't be going in and over. So it really just depends on the piece. There isn't a right or a wrong way. it depends on how he's playing, how she's playing. If it's loads of shells and those shells are being hit quite hard and they're carrying around the room, do I want it to sound like Adam and the Ants, or do I want it to sound like the Carpenters? Or, it just depends. It depends what you're after.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have just sort of final couple of things? Do you have a particular set of records, or 2 or 3 records that you think you're particularly proud of in terms of the sounds that you got, or a representative of the sounds that you're happiest making?
I love them all. I can't be favourite. Don't I need to pick favourites?
I know, that's a horrible question.
I know, isn't it? I love them all. I love a lot of them for very different reasons, and I am sonically obsessed. So, some of them would be, though some of the records that I've done really well might not be my favourite. My favourite might be like, I've got to just absolutely kill a drum sound on this track here, that maybe didn't do as well or whatever. But
yeah.
So I don't know. I know in the film, I think there's a point when it uses a track by Bridget May Power from her album that has a real kind of Spectre style drum sound on it.
Yeah.
And I know that that was one of those happy accidents, in that I mic'd the kit in a kind of, not on like a Glyn Johns way. There was about 4 or 5 mics on it. So it was going to be a bit spacious anyway. But then I'd left, when I went down to the control room, the mics above the grand piano opposite the other end of the room were still open. And I heard them and went, oh, fuck yeah, and just recorded those as well. And then when they came back down, they were just like, okay, so that's the sound of the album.
Wow. Yeah,
but we'd never discussed that. We'd never said, let's go for a Phil Spector full on. I just happened to walk into the control room, pull the faders up and go, oh my God, the mics, the 414 over the grand piano is still open. It's sounding beautiful.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So I'm gonna start a little playlist that of tracks that people have worked on. So I'll dig that one out and find that out. How did the film come about, by the way? I did mean to ask that, because it's such the way you think about analog. So I talk a lot about, mentality towards recording and takes and sort of being good at the part and discussing stuff. But the way you discuss it on the film is like just the next level of in-depth thought process behind it. And I've just loved it. Where did the idea of it come from, and how did it all sort of come about?
It came about by, Help Musicians gave me a small budget to make a film, and I was going to make this film about kind of like a Bill Leadery thing about recording folk music, because I just finished like the Lankham album. It done really well, and other folk records that had done really well. So I thought, well, I'll talk about Bill Leader's techniques in this little film, or something like that. I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do, but I got this little grant. So then when I contacted Miles O'Reilly, he said, I want to make the film about you and your process, about how you make records. I don't want you talking about somebody else. So that's how it happened. And so the way that he did it is he just is the way that Miles works, which is he would just float around the studio on a few sessions, filming stuff without you even really noticing. And then I put my thoughts into, I kind of organised them, and I just did the voiceover. Okay. And then handed him the voiceover, and he edited it all together.
Oh, amazing. I'll link to it in the show notes, because it's about 28 minutes long or something. It's but it's just such an amazing record of the way that you think about things, and there's some really cool little scenes of you recording some slightly unusual instruments, and I just think it's a really it's a really amazingly shot thing, but the content in it is incredible, and I think everybody who listens to this needs to go and watch it, because I'm going to watch it 3 or 4 times and make a ton of notes. I think it's great.
It still keeps gathering pace. Initially, we finished it literally just as COVID hit. Like, we finished it in March 2020, the final sort of edit, and we were going to put it all in for film fests.
Right.
And then all the film festivals were just cancelled and put into the long grass, and then that meant there was a backlog of things going in. And then I just rang Miles one day and said, let's just throw it up on the internet. Sure, like, what do we care? We did it with a grant, let more people see it whilst they're sat in lockdown, like, we're not able to go to gigs and stuff. Let people see it. So we threw it out there, and it's been amazing. I periodically, like every couple of weeks, will check in and go, another few thousand views and loads more comments. Like, it's weird.
But like you say, people's attention is going towards that style of recording now, and it's something that you've been doing for a long time. Yeah, Disney
putting out, like, they realised that people will sit and watch 8 hours of recording Get Back.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that have really enjoyed that. But yeah, that whole kind of just watching people do that process is something that people obviously like doing.
Yeah, it's it literally is behind the scenes, isn't it? And it's people are listening to records that you've made. They're not necessarily thinking about the thought processes behind it, and it's kind of nice to hear. They might see an interview of the artist, but nobody really hears your thoughts on how it all kind of went down. So it's nice.
Yeah.
I mean that this is packed full of great stuff anyway, but I always like to finish off by asking if you were to give what's a piece of advice that you've been given. It doesn't necessarily have to be about recording necessarily, but if there was something that is there something that stands out in your mind as a sort of a piece of advice, or just a sign off that would be interesting? A
takeaway is train your ears. Do all those things that don't cost you anything. Don't put yourself through thousands and thousands of pounds worth of courses and expect to be told things. Sit down with all the best records and listen, like, set yourself a little test. And those tests can include, I'm going to put a tally down every time I hear a hook. I'm going to put a tally down every time I hear such a guitar sound change. And so you just train your ears to analyse exactly what's going on, in the same way that a potential film director would be watching a film and seeing so much more than the general watcher would just be enjoying the plot and just, you just need to learn to think like a film director, but for music, so that you're sat there analysing every single minor little change in all your favourite records and then having a go at it.
I think that's something that's really practical, inspirational advice that people can take away and, do it right now after the, as soon as they get home. And it's something that I'm certainly going to do more of. I think I'll probably do it without thinking about it, but I want to do it consciously now that you've spoken about it so passionately. I think that's really practical advice for people. Thank you so much for giving me your time.
No worries.
It's been such a pleasure to speak to you.
No worries. Thanks for asking me. And keep me posted.
I will. I'll. So there we have it. Part 2 of my conversation with Julie McLarnon of Analog Catalogue. You will find some examples of her recording work in the new Spotify playlist that I've put together. I'm trying so hard to keep up to date with it. It's very difficult because I'm busy and just trying to cram everything in is hard. But putting stuff on a Spotify playlist is something I'm determined to commit to because I think it's really useful. And I know there's the whole thing about Spotify going on right now. Listen, if you find something that you like, go and buy it. I think I've said it before. I still buy CDs. I've got absolutely hundreds and hundreds of them. if I find an artist that I have a particular kinship with, or, you know, when the music just agrees with you straight away, go and spend a tenner on their record and support the music. I mean, rather clumsily, wasn't my intention, but I have an album that's available to purchase on my website, recorded straight to 2-track. There's some examples of that there. But, you know, £7, £8, £9, £10 supporting an artist, that's the way forward. Spotify is almost like a shop window for that kind of stuff. And it should be treated as such, like a sampling menu. And then when you find something you particularly like, go and support the artist in whatever way you can. There you go. I'll get off my soapbox right there. Don't forget that you can contact me. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums. And if you visit my website, allyouneedisdrums.com, there is a shop which has that aforementioned CD, also has lovely enamel mugs sporting the podcast logo that you can purchase to help support this podcast. And that is it. That just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Joe Kane for the intro and outro music, to Adam Mallet for the artwork he supplies, and to Rory Hancock for doing all of the uploading and mixing and everything for this podcast. I appreciate all of you. And I appreciate you for listening. Thank you so much, and I will be back next week. Goodbye!